This is the Nomad Futurist Podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabil Mahmood from Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Philip Koblenz from Brooklyn, New York.
This is Eli Scher from Margate, New Jersey.
Eli, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time. So let's start with your background. Who are you, what you do, and where you're at in your career?
So my name is Eli Scher. I usually reside in New York City, although I am currently broadcasting from Margate, New Jersey. Most recently, I was the founder of New Continuum Data Centers and United Internet Exchange, which is I guess what you'd call an edge compute infrastructure platform that we built in the Western Chicago suburbs and sold to SBA Communications. So I'm currently advising SBA. I'm also the chairman of OpenIX, the OpenIX Association, which is a nonprofit with basically that's designed to promote and the proliferation of internet exchange points.
That explains Margate. So, I've explained to you in the past why we started this podcast and, trying to create a platform for people that have had, winding roads to find themselves in technology. I know a little bit about your background, but I know enough to know that you did not start your career. You did not go to school to found data centers and peering points and to chair OpenIX. So can you tell us a little bit about the background, how somebody went from being born Eli Scher to being this new, OpenIX chair?
My background professionally began as an investment banker. So my career out of college initially, which was not particularly, controversial, was to just take a job at an investment bank. And initially I was doing structured finance, which is, if you don't know what that is, it's basically taking pools of cash flows and cutting them up and repricing them. And so I didn't love that. I didn't feel that I was close enough to business to really understand what was going on. And so I made several moves throughout my career to get closer to operations. So initially it was to another investment bank where I was learning about companies as opposed to securities. And then from there, I actually went and moved to Shanghai, China, where I lived for 5 years and built operating companies. So really got my hands dirty building businesses, mostly in the media space, but with some networking components as well. And then I came back to the U.S., again, working in finance, but looking for a business to build. And when I was looking for a business to build, I found a data center. And this data center was really interesting to me. And the more I learned about data centers and, sort of all of the things that go into a data center investment, the more I became convinced that this was a good place to spend my time. And so I ended up taking over this data center in the Western Chicago suburbs. And then, as I was building the data center, I came to the realization that the value in the facility was going to be enhanced by the applications that needed to be there, and the applications that would need to be there was going to be dictated by the networks that resided there, both physical networks, but also logical networks. So I realized that you really needed to actively, for the sake of the real estate, really understand that aspect of it and cultivating that fiber and interconnection. And so through that process, I ended up getting involved with a nonprofit called OpenIX and learning about it, and then realized that, not only is it good for real estate developers to distribute exchange points, it's good for networks to distribute exchange points, and it's also good for consumers if there are more distributed exchange points. So really, it's like kind of a good thing, right, across the board. It's bad for people who, want to hold on to it, right, and maintain the status quo. But even for them, it's not necessarily bad because they still control the boatload of the interconnect, because that's where the physical fiber connects. And so the logical interconnects will always be bounded at some point to the physical. So anyway, I through that journey, I've arrived at where I am today and sort of, feel pretty excited about the stuff we're working on.
Investment banking to media company, and then an entrepreneur, and then into data center. What was the turning point, and what was that convincing factor for you to take on and get involved in the data center business? I mean, considering that it's an extremely technical market segment to get in, relatively speaking, from your prior background.
Yep. So I think I chose to get into the level of technicality. So I probably could have not, right? Ostensibly, I could have sat back and been higher level and not really dug into it, and just sort of put together a deal. But I ended up, in a situation where I was actually forced to sort of jump in, with the deal I was running. And so I ended up in the deep end, right? And sort of figuring out, okay, how do we run this? What's important? And so because of that, I ended up, I think, getting exposure that I wouldn't have otherwise, and gaining expertise that I wouldn't have otherwise, right? Because I had to make those decisions, with sort of live customers and real workloads, and really understanding what mission critical means, right? And so that I think was great training for what I want to continue to do, which is continue to invest in, broadly speaking, in digital infrastructure. So.
I mean, you talk about like on-the-job training, right? Which is this bizarre world where people are like, all right, I'll take an entry-level job at some company, and they'll teach me the ropes. You found a data center, which means you found a building that happened to be a data center, and you're like, all right, let me take that over, and like started a data center company, and that was your first foray into it. Was you didn't start as like an engineer or selling data center services or even understanding that world. You started straight into like owning a data center. I think one of the things that we say on the podcast a lot is just based on our generation, because we were here at kind of the beginnings of the internet, there's this lack of fear about jumping in head first, because it's it's an industry that we kind of have seen exist, so we don't have to worry about kind of barriers to entry. How much of that do you think, that kind of lack of fear of moving into it, had to do with just where you were generationally in terms of just the existence of the industry, rather than say if you decided you just wanted to get into any other industry, like I want to start I can't even think of anything right now, but I want to start a fintech firm, or I want to start a healthcare firm, or something along those lines.
Right. Yeah. So certainly, if you look at anything I've done in my career, I don't operate with a ton of fear. Right. I believe by and large.
Who doesn't move to Shanghai on a whim? What are you talking about?
Right. Not on a whim. I speak Mandarin, so it was something I wanted to do, but it was, certainly, as I think back on it, not too dissimilar from buying a data center, right? It's sort of, I also raised a SPAC, a publicly traded acquisition vehicle. I'd never really dealt with public markets before, right? But I feel confident in my ability to navigate and sort of make the best decision with whatever is presented, right? So I guess, from a data center standpoint, perhaps that's what attracted me to the industry, was the fact that it is so opaque, and there's such a lack of understanding outside of this small group of what exactly goes into provisioning infrastructure and IT. And so because of that, I sort of thought, hey, this is an area where there's opportunity. And so, not so much that I should be scared away because it's like, daunting, but more that like others will be scared away. And so that's a good place for me to focus. Yeah.
Eli, when you got into the space and data center, I mean, from your previous background, what were some of the challenges? Did you encounter like people talking down on you because you're not an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer, or you're not a networking guy? And how did you deal with it?
Look, I try to operate with, like I said, I don't operate with a lot of fear, but I try to operate with humility. So while I'm confident, I try to also recognize my limitations, and I've never claimed to be, an expert in any of these fields. But I think, I'm consistent and I work very hard. And so I think people who work with me see that. And so I end up sort of through, volunteering and getting things done, and, even operating, my facility and building the internet exchange and all of that stuff. I think over time you develop some reputation, right, for, operating at a certain level. So, look, I'm sure people, would hate on me and talk behind my back and whatever, but
that doesn't really happen.
Exactly. No, it doesn't really faze me because, it's sort of, I'm not claiming to know all of these things. I'm just claiming to know how to access the best and the brightest and figure out how to put it all together. And, that's really, that's the only thing. So look, it's, entering any industry, you're going to have those issues, right? People have been doing it a lot longer, but that's why you're able to stand on the shoulders of giants, or whatever the expression is, and make progress, right?
So if you were given the opportunity to go back in the future, what would be that one thing that you would do differently or tell yourself?
Honestly, it's like just load up on NVIDIA. Just buy as much NVIDIA as possible when it's under $10, and like.
Once a finance guy, always a finance guy.
I don't know. Like I personally, I don't like to live with regrets either, right?
So let me rephrase the question. Yeah. What would you tell your younger self, knowing what you know today?
Start a business. Stop finance. That's what I would tell somebody. So I feel like I spent a lot of time in finance where I got what I needed out of finance relatively early. And so I think ultimately it's great to get exposure and to see like a wide range of industries and really understand how a lot of things fit together. But I think it's not how the world actually works. And so when you get from behind a spreadsheet and actually need to be in the real world with business decision makers negotiating things on timelines that they don't care about, your quarter, they don't care about, right? I mean, this is a different, it's a different level of understanding, right? So I think, getting closer to business operations is the best thing, you could do, I think.
How much do you think the fact that you had that finance background helped in terms of you being able to bridge that gap between, having to learn how to operate the business, and then, obviously you're, at your core, you enjoy the realness of operations, but you still had to go back and deal with, financing and cap tables and all the things that, business owners have to deal with. How much of that background do you think actually helped?
For sure, a lot. For sure, right? I mean, it's, I know, enough to be dangerous about a lot of things, right? So I know enough to draft a little contract, I can put the presentations together, the models together. I can do finance if I have to, but, I'm not a professional finance person or a lawyer or anything like that. So, yeah, I think, that skill set allows me to pull it all together well. I think you can get that consulting, and you can get that in some other areas as well. But yes, I think that gave me a broad skill set, a broad, set of tools to put stuff together, and maybe approach things like you said, from the high level, right? And just buy a data center day one, start an exchange. Why not? I don't know.
Well, I think the one thing that we touch on a lot in terms of the type of characteristics that younger folks need to bring to new opportunities, the ability to critically think, being curious, that trust in yourself that you can learn, and that trust in yourself that you can let yourself be vulnerable enough to let other people know what you don't know so you can learn. And I think that a lot of people tend to work out of fear of being exposed for not knowing something, or fear of being exposed for not being as smart as you may think somebody thinks that you are. It's kind of difficult to articulate that. It's that you can't really learn it in school, but it's one of those kind of reinforced things that you learn through upbringing. If I had to figure out, the reasons why you are so good at what you did, it's probably more, your upbringing than it was your education, just because, you seemed like it was reinforced for you to be confident in your own kind of brain's ability to adapt.
The ability to, sort of get things done is more important than anything else, right? And so if you're taught from an early age that you can do anything, right, then certainly that's helpful. I think, but I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure what exactly caused me to feel that I could do it. I honestly feel that anybody can, right? But ultimately it's about, having that belief that you can get it done or figure it out. But also not having the fear of failure, I guess. And that's really where, look, I mean, it's not that I don't have it or didn't have it. You always have it, right? It's just a matter of, can you live well with it or not? Can you live with the pressure or not? I guess I can. So, yeah, but I think, broadly speaking, people, I think just need to feel comfortable accepting challenges, right? And knowing that, they haven't sort of done whatever they're about to do before is okay, right? That's actually a good thing. That's progress, and you should be making progress. So, I don't think people should be afraid to sort of get involved, and it isn't something that's terribly super complicated, right? I don't think. There's a lot of moving pieces, but anyway.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit here. So in the current state of affairs that we are in right now, what are some of the biggest hurdles that you're seeing? What are the barriers as it entails your technology and what you are doing, particularly with OpenIX?
So, yeah, I mean, I think right now, I'm more, broadly focused on digital infrastructure, right? So let's just call it the, fiber tower data center complex. And, from sort of that standpoint, broadly speaking, there are tailwinds, right? It's not a bad time to be in this business, right? Whether you're selling internet.
Time to be in this business.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you try to understate it a little bit, right? You try to, just because everybody else is not doing well, right? But it's, it's all of these are interesting asset classes and are getting a lot more attention. So, it doesn't mean they're all good investments, though, and it doesn't mean that every single pocket is growing. So there are definitely areas of the data center market that are not growing. There are definitely areas of the data center market that are growing enough to overcompensate for areas that are not growing. There are areas of fiber that are growing. There are areas that are not, right? So it's really nuanced, right? And so, but broadly speaking, I think things are good and there's a lot of opportunity. So the trick from, my perspective is sort of identifying opportunities where, I believe you're not going to have ridiculous competition because at this point, certain types of deals, there's just no point. Like as an entrepreneur, there's nothing for you to do. It's, it's a finance game and these are like very big numbers and there's just not a lot of value to create. But, if you're looking at other opportunities and along this spectrum, call it like a private network or something like that, or a data center, in a non-core market that doesn't have interconnect yet, or a fiber route that's required, right? These are all interesting assets that need investment and you can get a return on them. And if they're, decent, you can multi-tenant them. Then it becomes, really sort of an interesting, group or sort of set of assets. So, yeah, I mean, I'm excited about where we are right at the moment. I think there's a lot of, opportunity to do deals. The challenges are really avoiding those areas that aren't growing, avoiding those, those situations that are overbid, right? Where people want it so badly, they're willing to pay ridiculous prices and there's just no yield, there's no return. So yeah, I think those are the sort of the biggest challenges at the moment and with the context of the opportunities.
Is there a specific thing that surprises you or stands out to you as an opportunity given, I can't imagine you predicted a pandemic 5 months ago, right? So, we find ourselves in this new world. Well, maybe you did, but most people didn't. We find ourselves in this new world. And is there an opportunity that you might not have seen 5 months ago that you think is more acute now? If you want to share it, I know you don't want to give away your secret sauce.
No, I do think so. And some things that I'm kind of working on and, but I think sort of the bandwidth bottlenecks throughout, right, have been exposed. And a lot of them are at the edge of the networks, the consumer facing edge of the network where, the pipes weren't big enough and, people just need more bandwidth if they're going to work and consume rich data and the kids are going to consume rich data and it's all going to happen from home now. There's different infrastructure that's required. So I think there's some, specific builds that are, that I think will be available, right, or that will be required, are actually already happening, right? There are communities that are requiring them. And then, I think there's some opportunities, in regional data centers. I think that regional data centers are going to continue to struggle, but in pockets, they'll do well. So it really, you have to be careful about picking your assets there. But there's some opportunities. And then, I think, private networks is something that I've been spending some time on and I think is really interesting. So the concept is basically building a 5G network for, an enterprise or a community. And, ultimately that becomes the 5G network or the hardware that lives in that location. And then all the networks end up having to pay you for service that their consumers, right? So basically roaming, right? So you basically collect on roaming. Now there's a lot of assumptions in that in terms of like the open radio access network and all of these things. But if you can make numbers work on the network itself, on a private network, say like a CBRS network, then potentially there's some component of that infrastructure that you can multi-tenant, even if it's not the RAN. But so yeah, there's lots of stuff that's interesting. But again, it's like specific areas.
So Eli, COVID-19 has basically grounded us all, flying 250,000 miles a year to now not being able to go to a grocery store. It's mind-boggling. The future really is digital transformation, whereby have the opportunity to work from anywhere and be at the beach if you choose to. Where do you think we are today, and what's the future going to be like in the next 2-3 years? I personally believe we are stuck in COVID-19 for at least another year and a half, if not longer. And the norm is do these video conferences. The norm is telepresence. The norm is the virtual reality that we are creating. Where do you think the technology is headed as far as the industry is concerned? What's next?
This was interesting, this whole exercise, and I think you're right. People are going to largely stay put for the next period of time until there's a proven vaccine, I think.
Or unless November 6th, we get a different president, it's all gone.
Well, I don't know that, I don't think the problems are solved, right? Like, I think the problems don't get solved until, like, in terms of moving around, like, nobody's going to feel comfortable moving around until that somebody's not going to just, like, cough on you and you're dead, right? I mean, it's just, that's the reality. So with that, business travel is going to be curtailed, and we're going to be doing more of this, right? And I think you should expect that. I think eventually, through testing or a combination of testing and treatment, whatever it is, we're able to limit it and get it down to a manageable, way to live, right? Where we can move around again. But it's going to look different. And so, I think air travel is going to look very different. I think you're going to want to see, smaller compartments, right? A lot of these vertical takeoff, short distance flights. I think the airline industry is going to get totally upended. And so look, there's a lot of stuff that's changing, and and I think that's all positive, broadly speaking, for technology, because all of the changes are fueled by technology. And so now the other thing is stimulus, right? And because of COVID-19, I believe we're going to get, we've already seen a ridiculous amount of stimulus, but you're going to see more, and potentially targeted at digital infrastructure and, underserved areas to bridge the digital divide, and, getting ahead of China in the 5G race. There's all kinds of political initiatives to do this. And so I think that you're going to see, investment there as well. So I think, just generally speaking, it's, a period of growth for digital infrastructure and technology. Not exactly everywhere, right? So you can't just close your eyes. But, generally speaking, it's the trend is certainly up and to the right.
What are some of those areas, like you mentioned 5G, and you mentioned edge computing? What are some of the other areas, as an entrepreneur and as somebody that's been in the industry, contributing and sitting on the board being chair of the OpenIX? What are some of those other areas that our listeners should potentially look into, or at least start exploring?
So, yeah, I mean, I do think that, like I said, I think private networks are interesting. I think, generally speaking, what we found is there's not a lot of knowledge about interconnection out there. So as we've talked to folks who are building private wireless networks, often they're people who deliver fixed wireless service, right? So it's somebody who basically has transport back to a data center, and then that transport leads to an antenna, and they broadcast that internet signal, right? So it's a very simple mobile internet, but basically in that community, there's very little understanding of how to procure internet and where to get it. So they're really good at the radios and the local side and getting the permitting and all that. But then when it comes to internet, they just like call up one vendor and they get 10 gigs and that's it. And it's sort of this black box. And they could be in, some rural, Texas and getting their internet out, from Minnesota, right, instead of Dallas. And that just makes no sense, right? So, I think there's all kinds of bad routing that's happening, and that can be fixed, right, by more exchange points, but not only more exchange points, people knowing what to do with them. I encourage people to look into interconnection more and understand more about where it is and where how it can help your network.
So with COVID-19, what's some of the big concerns that you have? How has that affected you personally, organizationally, and what are you guys doing differently?
For one thing, he's in Margate, so some things are looking up.
Yeah, but I think we were in Manhattan for 45 days and didn't leave our apartment, right? Like literally did not leave the apartment. So, we take it very seriously. Certainly there were, a number of people who passed away who I know, and, my doorman, the guy who owns the diner, right? People we know who we saw every day, right? So it was real and we understood that. So it certainly affected us personally, in sort of a, fear kind of way and sort of respect kind of way. I'm not going to mess around with the virus. That said, right, I'm a proponent of not staying still, right, and figuring out how to adapt and move through it. So, I think it's been a shock for everybody. And so I think that, the key now is how do we safely return to activity that's healthy for everybody, right? So, I'm worried about schools, right? I'm concerned with my kids and how they're going to continue to learn and who's going to educate them. And it's still going to fall on my wife mostly, which is great because she's super smart and capable, but I think like she's got to be mom, right? And so all kinds of, I think things to be very concerned about with COVID. Generally speaking, though, I'm also an optimist, and so I believe that we will figure out how to either work through it or get the vaccines or whatever is required. Over time, we'll get there. And so, I think that the key is sort of how long it's going to take and being comfortable and productive throughout. So, I think, fortunately in our industry, there's stuff to do and things to work on. And, so I feel lucky and fortunate to be doing this. Hopefully the other industries will come back and, or we'll be able to create more jobs for other people. So
yeah, crazy times indeed. There's no question about it. We talked about this earlier. You're a city guy, right? You grew up in Philly. You live in Manhattan. There is no question that the landscape of the urban environment has changed. And I have to imagine that it's changed, far beyond the time that we get to the point where there's a vaccine. I think there was a statistic that, 80% of restaurants that that were closed are not going to reopen. And, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Retail stores, gyms. There were like 3 different, in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, there were like 3 different, punch, pedal, spin class places that there's just no way those places are coming. They had just opened, and there's just no way those places are coming back. What do you think the future of, urban environments like New York City or Philadelphia or any of these larger cities, Chicago, et cetera, look like? Do you think there's, what happens to all your commercial real estate, to a lot of those retail spaces that, it was just through the stratosphere, the rental income and the tax base in those cities and whatnot. What happens?
So I think there are a lot of really smart people thinking about this, right? And specifically thinking about it with respect to technology and, fortunately in New York City, right? So I believe that in some ways you're going to make these things, this real estate accessible again, right? Because you had, well, to your point, you had these 3 businesses. The only businesses that could open there were were chains that had overhead to waste, because who could ever afford? I mean, the numbers would probably never make sense, right? And so I think a lot of the New York real estate was predicated on, sales numbers that weren't achievable for a lot of these restaurants. And so, a lot of them were going out of business anyway, right? Which is why they were on whatever it is, on a caravan or whatever it is. They were going to go out of business at the first sign of stress. But there are a lot of businesses like that, and there is going to be a lot of empty space. So, look, there's a lot of, I think, opportunity to use these empty spaces and combine that with technology to create experiences, right? And so and safe experiences. So again, we talked about that earlier, right? You have to be sensitive about privacy concerns, but I think you can create all kinds of new experiences with 5G, right? If you look at sort of immersive media, or you can start to imagine some of these. I'm sure you've seen these really cool sort of talks people do, or videos where they'll show you like the store of the future, where you can kind of walk in and visualize things, and you don't have to, you don't necessarily have to try it on. You can sort of visually, you can, virtually do that. But I think there will be ways, that honestly we haven't come up with yet, but to enrich those experiences, and that's really, I think, where the cities are going to come back. And so it's going to be that you have to be there, and you're going to have to eat the food, but also it's going to be somehow more. I don't know what it means yet, but I recognize that it's going to have to change in order to draw people back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of the problem in a lot of these large cities, though, is these kind of intransigent landlords that have these expectations that they're going to have to get on board with making the spaces more accessible. Before COVID, you would see retail spaces, you would see commercial real estate vacancies that were it was more worth it to the landlords to keep them open than to make a deal to allow a small business to open up. And how do you get to the standpoint where you kind of recalibrate that? It seems like it's going to take some pain to do it. And I don't think people are going to line up to give those guys stimulus, right? So it's going to be, probably a tough time, a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, but they've been getting like this whole thing now has been just kicking the can, right? So it's everything that's been going on right now has basically been to make sure that these types of businesses stay open. These PPP loans are predicated on you maintaining employment, and those people have to stay employed through the end of the PPP loan, right? So it's all designed to sort of kick the can and not face the music here, which is that the world's changed. Nobody's shopping like this anymore. Nobody's coming to your restaurant for takeout. Nobody's, right? It's not coming back.
And some of those, and in some cases, some of those trends were starting even before. This was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you've got the landlord, he's got the bank to deal with, right? So it's really, that's where it ultimately lands, is on the bank's balance sheets. And that's why the government's so concerned about not letting that cascade, because if every single, restaurant or whatever, or, gym, you fill in the blank, these are all anchor tenants, right? If all of your anchor tenants, every single commercial real estate portfolio is dead. Also because they're all levered and cut up because of the CDOs.
I think I've turned Eli. He doesn't sound as optimistic as he once was.
No, I mean it's those. I think that's a very dangerous thing. I think we need to, as a country, be very focused on repurposing real estate, right, and making sure that we can find uses for businesses and making sure people are employed too, right? I mean,
that's the thing, but it can't be the employee's job. It can't be the business's job. It can't, to a certain extent, even be the landlord's job. It's got to start at the top. So the banks have to be on board for this kind of reinvention, because otherwise it's all these guys trying to keep the big bad banks or the big bad landlords at bay. And you see these stories about, eviction moratoriums ending, I think today or last Friday, at the same time that PPP money has run out. That period of time is over. The can kicking is now gone. The extra unemployment insurance is now gone. And now everyone is kind of fending for themselves while the bank is just kind of waiting for the house of cards to implode, when in reality, they're the ones we're propping up. I don't know.
Right.
It's just ridiculous.
No, you're right. But
let the record show that Eli Scher said I was right.
No, I think it's a ridiculous concept. But ultimately, right, so I think you need people to come to the table and say, look, enough landlords, need to say, look, this is what we need, right? This is the program on a national level that the banks can institute that would work. And I don't think we know what that is. Is it some sort of relief period? Is it some sort of, we don't know, because we don't know what the other end looks like and they can't model it. So right now, nobody even knows what to ask for. The banks would be willing.
Based on the modeling, I mean, we've got a lot of models to follow. I mean, we have the Great Depression that we can potentially look into.
Yeah. What was, so with the Great Depression, I mean, it was just like no economic activity. Is that kind of what happened? Nobody, I don't understand. I'm not a student of history enough to really have an informed discussion around this, or comparing it to other times. But I'm certainly a student of today's nonsense.
Yeah, I think the solution to I'm not a student of history either. I think the solution to the Great Depression was a world war. I actually think that's the only way you got out of it, was to inspire, like you.
We're certainly trying.
I mean, right? So let's get going on World War III. It's the only way out.
We're working on it.
Broken. The news is broken.
Feels like he's working
I'm going to stay on the island.
Let's see. We have to start it while Nabil is still in on the mainland.
No, but you could have a big infrastructure spend would make sense, right? Our rail sucks. Our highways suck. Our internet, could be better. So look, the fixed line internet's not bad, right? It worked well for me in New York, to be honest. But in a lot of areas, it didn't work well, right? That's the truth. And so, but mostly it's good. The wireless internet needs to be improved. And so if we're going to have, a 5G future, which is going to house all these new applications and hopefully spawn a new era of development for.
I think you have 30% of the people in Congress think that 5G caused COVID-19. I mean, how are these people going to help you invest in broadening the 5G infrastructure? That's your future is infrastructure investment by the people that think it caused the problem in the first place.
That's super disturbing. I don't know. I mean, that's not in Congress, isn't that? That's not really in Congress. I saw that on the.
Well, it's a combination thereof, right? It's a leadership that's propagating, like anything that's going on in the world. It's leadership that's propagating. We propagate.
Yeah.
And guess what? The people that are taking these actions and burning down the towers are the ones that are just followers. They don't know. Oh my gosh, George told me. I believe in George. 5G is the root cause of coronavirus.
5G and Bill Gates.
Yeah.
those two guys.
Right. Look, I mean, I feel, mostly that's not what people think. And I think
said 30%. I didn't say 60%.
30%. We can still get it passed. But I think the concept is digital divide, right? The concept is rural America doesn't have the same speed internet and therefore isn't enjoying the same level of applications and all of these things. There's a whole push for the like the smart farm, right? I don't know if you've seen that, but there's some really cool stuff that people are doing. There's a company we work with who's put together a group called the Rural Cloud Initiative, which is basically bringing together a lot of these fixed wireless providers and helping them deliver more efficient infrastructure. And so, that, and they're putting together the showcase, which is essentially the farm of the future. And it's, all of these, like, there's nobody there, right? It's all these connected devices. There's a drone, there's the tractor, all of these things that can be monitored and operated remotely. And so, I mean, I think that's, there's a lot of cool stuff that's going to continue to happen around that. And nobody can oppose that, I don't think, right? Maybe they can. Maybe they find a way. Somebody would find a way.
There's a way. There's a will, there's a way. People don't like change. People, they'll try to make it great again. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's like security, food supply. It's a lot of good things.
Make 5G great.
Oh, God.
Eli, you've been in the industry for a few years. One of the things that I continuously struggle with is the fact that, and you don't need to be a historian or student of history, but it's just common sense. At least that's the way I look at it. It's the fact that we have gone through these cycles. Like we went through the digital divide. We talk about it today. We've gone through this cycle before when we actually migrated from a 14.4K modem and got into a gig, when we migrated from an analog cell phone and got into the digital platform, and we've gone through 1G and now we're talking 4G, so on and so forth. That's always been there. I believe that the common denominator is us, mankind. It's the leadership. It's the lack of awareness and education. How do we get past that based on where you're at in your career? What are some of the things that we should be doing as far as educating people, as far as, potentially getting past this divide? What are some of those things that we should be doing?
No doubt, everything is done by people, right? So I agree with you, right? This is all, ultimately, when I talk to you about my career, meandering or whatever I was doing, right? I was, getting closer to where people were making decisions, right? Where it was, initially I started doing structured finance, and I was like, this isn't really real. This is just numbers flying around. Ultimately now we're trying to deal with people and sort of even get down to like communities and see where those decisions are made. I mean, I think like, generally speaking, deals don't get done without people agreeing, right? Nothing happens without people coming together. We've sought it out so much. I mean, the growth of this type of platform and Zoom and all of these things is we're looking for that connection. I think, we need to connect with more people. And to, I think the mission of this podcast, right, is to reach out to folks who don't know about this industry and know that it, might, help their life in some way or make their life more convenient, but they really don't understand. And so I think outreach and education is important to continuing to make sure people are engaged and able to deliver the progress, right? We're talking about 5G and new networks and all these things. Well, if you don't have engineers who actually know how to build these things, you're gonna have a problem, right? And so we need to continue to encourage that. I think having sort of open frameworks where people share knowledge is great for that. And so, yeah, I think, generally speaking, we've got to continue to bring people in and educate to make sure that we can live the future that we want to live from a technology standpoint.
I always talk about this issue for the reason, the inspiration for this podcast in the first place, which is trying to bring, younger people into this industry to make sure that they know it exists, because, the people in the conference circuit, the thought leaders, if you will, to everyone out there, I'm using air quotes, the thought leaders like us are the ones that are aging, and we're not being replaced by a younger generation. And I think in general, it's because we were here when this industry essentially started, over the last, let's say 20, 23, 25 years. And that was really when we came into our own, when we became, adults and came in. The folks before us, the baby boomers and the older generation guys, think of the internet still as this kind of inaccessible fad or whatever to a certain extent. You have a president that doesn't email because he doesn't really believe in it. Although he searches for emails, it's strange. And then you have the younger kids who take it for granted. It just works. You have engineers coming out of school now that think computer infrastructure, internet infrastructure is whatever graphical interface they see at Amazon, and it just magically works. You have my kids that know how to use Zoom to a certain extent better than their parents. Not me, because I'm a freaking genius, but better than their parents in some cases. And they understand how it all works, but they don't understand why it works. And they're not really taught the underlying, why it works in school. Maybe like a small sliver of high school will get into some technology components. But I think that'll be my kind of final thought for the day is that notion that the children are our future. But in reality, it's making the underlying infrastructure, the why everything works, accessible to the older generation and the younger generation. And the reason why we are where we are is because we had no choice but to figure out why it works, because it was kind of created while we were coming into our own.
To be fair, the kids are really good at Zoom. So it's hard to argue with them. They're very, very good with the virtual backgrounds and all that.
I love it. The effects on FaceTime, my God, can't take it.
So good. I had no idea half of these features existed. It's crazy, right. That's like when you randomly press buttons with the, not knowing that you could delete everything or find something really cool. That's how you discover it.
That's true. But then when you're in the car and you go to a spot where you don't have internet, they freak out because they have no concept of why it works, when it works. And then they're just smacking it on the ground like Neanderthals trying to get it to work again.
Yeah. No. So I try to make it very clear to my kids, how you're getting it. You see that over there? That's a small cell. That's how you're getting this signal. I try to make it clear to them, because whenever there's any sort of outage, it's probably my fault, right? So usually, no matter what, it's the internet's down. It's Dad, what'd you do? I'm okay, I have nothing to do with the internet in this location.
You said you are the internet, Dad. How come? Make it work.
You work on this stuff? Can you call the guy? I mean, what's up, right?
Daddy, make the phone call, Daddy.
Call the internet and make it work.
Call the internet. I know, I get it. But it's look, it is important to understand how it all works, and ultimately, I think, and this is part of the broader thesis, as people are building applications that actually need to behave a certain way, right? They're going to figure it out again. They're going to understand what latency means again. And they're going to understand, as we build this new network, we're going to need it to have this type of characteristics. But I think, they're going to be, I think they're going to come with the next wave. And I think part of the issue is, you need that next wave to bring people in, right? And I think it's happening, right? I think it's, you're starting to feel some of that momentum. And look, I think that once you bring people in and they start to see, that the growth that is inherent in this market, I think it's going to continue, right? You're going to have more and more people, expressing interest. They may not know what's underneath all of the software that they're writing, but they're going to have to get, somebody's going to have to know. And so, it's okay, right? Well, we have to continue to make noise and make people aware, but ultimately, if they want things to work the way they want them to work, the power has to be on.
We are at the final part of the podcast recording. What are some of your thoughts and the secret sauce that you could potentially share with our listeners?
There's no real secret. I think everybody will tell you the same thing. Consistency, and, sort of never taking no for an answer, I guess, right? So consistency and persistence. I think those are the key characteristics. And so put in the work every day, right? That's the consistency thing, and never give up. So, if you do those two things, you'll be successful. And there's all kinds of great quotes, you never lose if you never stop playing, right? All kinds of great ways to say this. But the basic principles that I've found that have led me to be successful in the few times that I have been, because I put in the work and not cut corners, right? Every single day. And, because I've been stubborn and said, this is exactly how it is because I'm certain of it, and I will maintain that forever. And, it turns out you don't have to maintain it forever. But, you have to be ready.
Just long enough to get the deal closed.
No, look, but you have to be ready to. And so I think that's important.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we'll all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. I'm confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.com.